As groundbreaking as Doom was for the gaming industry in 1993, it sure cast a hell of a shadow over its peers. Two such games peering out from behind Doom were Blake Stone Aliens of Gold and his 1994 sequel Blake Stone Planet Strike. Aliens of Gold, created by Jam Productions and published by Wolfenstein publisher Apogee Software, released on December 3, 1993, a mere week before Doom, and that was all the head start it got before it was swallowed up by the warping popularity of id Software's crowning achievement. Part of the reason was that Blake Stone was a Wolfenstein clone, running on id's engine with a few modifications and mimicking much of its gameplay and story tropes. With Doom blowing the doors off the industry with its slick level design and exciting combat against interesting AIs, Blake Stone felt decidedly dated almost as soon as it hit the market. So the question for me, when I dug up this obscure shooter series was, is it worth remembering, or is its unfortunate timing a convenient overlap for its irrelevance? That's the question of the day, and you're in luck, because I've got the answer. And before we get into it, a special thank you goes out to G-Man Liz for finding and providing me the Beastone source port executable file, and an extra special thank you to the folks who developed the Beastone source port, throughout which this video would not have been possible. Alright, let's get stuck in. As important as Wolfenstein 3D is to my gaming story, if you will, as the first-person shooter I ever played, it's definitely a less elegant and interesting concoction than its ensuing brethren like, say, Doom or Dark Forces. The action is punchy and fun as ever, but the level design is simplistic and repetitive, and the game often salts the wound by throwing in mazes for variety. Even id Software was pretty sick of designing the game's levels by the time they were done with the Spear of Destiny expansion. But the game was a smash hit, and provided the initial momentum to put all eyes on id and give them a practice run at perfecting their signature shooter style. Wolfenstein's popularity guaranteed imitators, and that's where Blake Stone comes in. Blake Stone's creator, Jam Productions, was founded in 1993 by Jim Rowe and Mike Maynard, and the company name is actually an acronym for Jim and Mike. These two gents were departmental heads for Gamer's Edge, which is the subscription service that John Romero started at Softdisk in 1990 before he and others left to found id Software. Maynard and Rowe had also helped create Catacomb Abyss and Catacomb Armageddon for Softdisk, two of the sequels to the first true 90s first-person shooter in Catacomb 3D. Aliens of Gold's 18-month development was completed by Maynard and Rowe and artist Jerry Jones, and the first episode was shareware just like Wolfenstein. It also released with a cool little comic book called A Blake Stone Adventure. In the game itself, you play as British spacefaring secret agent Blake Stone, a James Bond knockoff with a touch of Flash Gordon.
But of course you are.
He's got a tragic backstory of a horrible accident killing his father and injuring his mother so badly his sister has had to care for her ever since. He joined the British Navy and was thought to retire at 26 after 8 successful years of service, but his skills were needed elsewhere, stopping the ensuing evil of mad scientist Dr. Pyrrhus Goldfire, who's creating mutants through human experimentation and who plans to use his space bases to invade the Earth. His name was actually Dr. Goldstern early in development, which you can see from this promotional poster, but it was changed to avoid the connotation that Jewish people were evil, perhaps a further nod to the lessons of World War II in Wolfenstein. Either way, Goldfire and friends are mostly just a monolithic stand-in for we out here just trying to shoot fools, and Blake Stone's got you covered on that front. You'll be doing said shooting across 6 episodes, each consisting of 9 main floors and 2 secret levels, each culminating in a 2-tiered boss fight where you defeat Dr. Goldfire and then one of his super mutants. You start out in an elevator at the beginning of each floor, and once you've found the red key in each level, you'll return to the elevator and use it to unlock the next floor. Levels have an ornate sci-fi aesthetic to them and are certainly more interesting than, say, Wolfenstein. Aliens of Gold was also the first Wolfenstein engine game to feature ceiling textures, a big deal at the time. But if there's any poop to fling at Aliens of Gold, it's that most levels are just the same looking passageways, very slightly remixed with limited interaction points like push walls, some of which are behind paintings of Dr. Goldfire, much like the Hitler painting push walls in Wolfenstein. But to Aliens of Gold's credit, completing levels isn't just as simple as shooting your way through till you find the red key. To boost your score, you can pick up bags of money, gold bars, or treasure chests that use the same sprite as Wolfenstein's. Why a top-secret mad scientist facility has random valuables chilling all over the floor is anyone's guess. Vanity? Insanity?
The world may never know.
More importantly, the levels have hazards like electrospheres that bounce from wall to wall and cause massive damage to the player unless you shoot them out of the air. Electrical barriers will block your way or guard certain items, much like in the Catacomb Adventure games, and you'll need to find the switch to turn them off. Depending on a level's length and complexity, you'll also need to find other color-coded keys like blue and yellow that are required to unlock the way forward. You'll also have to smartly manage one-way doors to get around any closed-off areas or make sure you don't go too far, pass through the door, and aren't able to double back once the one-way door closes behind you. Additional considerations are the turrets that hang from the ceiling, and they can't be shot down except by 2 of your mid-tier ballistic weapons, so you'll have to be extra sneaky and avoid them until you've found such a weapon. On level 3 and level 4 difficulties, these cat and mouse games with the turrets show up pretty early on in each episode and really make you work for your initial progress. Now, my favorite part of Aliens of Gold's design is its auto map. Created as a response to the criticism leveled against Wolfenstein's often confusing layouts, this sucker can be brought up at any time and shows you where you've been, often kind of hinting at the shape of the level where you need to go next, and cataloging where some keys are and which doors still require a key to unlock. It's immensely helpful for not getting lost and makes the levels a lot faster and more satisfying to get through as a result. The gold standard of Boomer maps is still Ultima Underworld's incredible autofilling map that you could write notes on, but Aliens of Gold's map is a close second, and something I wish other shooters at the time emulated nearly as effectively. Blakestone's most interesting feature, however, is its inclusion of NPCs, a first for the first-person shooter genre. These guys are called biotechs, lab coat-loving scientists who work for Dr. Goldfire, and also look like they may have had a hand in creating the Powerpuff Girls. They patrol the base and inspect the machinery, making the environments feel functional and lived in, rather than just being a diorama to support combat. You can speak with them, and they'll respond either with something menacing and then attack you, or they'll reveal they're informants, whose allegiance lies with you, and they'll gift you with helpful tips, ammo, or food tokens that you can redeem at nearby food stations for a 10-point heal per token. This interaction system is the first time that I can trace anyway that a shooter emphasized this type of threat level consideration, instead of just asking you to fire at anything that moves. It's even possible that Aliens of Gold influenced 1996's Strife, a first-person shooter that ate RPG tropes like a large interconnected world and NPCs that you could converse and trade with. Significantly, Strife's FPS RPG hybrid style is often credited for laying the groundwork for Deus Ex, one of the most important games ever made. To think that Blake Stone may have had a small but guiding hand in some of Deus Ex's core design tenets is pretty exciting to think about. But back to the game itself. Is it fun to play? Well, if you liked Wolfenstein, you'll probably be okay playing through Aliens of Gold, although Wolfenstein's level of feedback is, of course, far superior. Enemies often cry out when they've seen you and when they die, just like Wolfenstein, and some of the weapon effects sound pretty much like that game as well, particularly the machine gun variant. Your foes in this game often ape the Wolfenstein archetypes of the grunt type with a pistol or the machine gunning SS soldier variant, but only to a point. A big shout out though has to go to the awesome looking monsters here that jump right out of pulpy sci-fi or a 1960s Fantastic Four comic book cover. You've got this Clayface looking dude, this insect looking thing, water monsters, plasma creatures, these horrible bloody vampire looking guys that reanimate off of gurneys as you pass by. These green mutants that look a lot like Fallout super mutants to me.
I still miss you, Rhonda, after all these years.
And so many more. The enemies die in some pretty gruesome ways too, and they need to in order to keep the action satisfying, because just like Wolfenstein, every weapon you pick up is more powerful than the last, so you have little incentive to switch to another weapon except to blow up turrets or to avoid a splash damage weapon in tight quarters. All your weapons run off the same charge pack ammunition, which you can pick up in the environment or receive as a reward from one of the biotechs. You start off with the auto charge pistol, which has a cooldown between each shot and unlimited ammo. It's supposedly there to help you pick people off without alerting other enemies, but you get seen pretty much right away by everybody in a room anyway, so it isn't really a factor, and this gun gets outmoded pretty quickly, so it's just a fallback on harder difficulties when ammo is sparse. You'll pick up the more useful slow fire protector pistol next, or as Civvy likes to call it.
Blake Rock? What the fuck is a Blake Rock?
Bruh, we won't revoke your boomer shooter badge yet, but you're on watch now, buddy. And then the rapid assault weapon, the first weapon that can kill turrets, and which feels a good bit like Wolfenstein's machine gun. The other weapon capable of killing turrets is the beastly dual
To the cranberry electronic coward.
is the beastly dual neutron disruptor, which is a powerful minigun that'll become your default if you manage to find its secret location in each level. The last major weapon of Aliens of Gold is the Plasma Discharge Unit, which has some really cool and impressive fire effects for a 1993 game. It behaves like a volley and does insane splash damage. Also was apparently the inspiration for a custom weapon featured in Gary's mod many years later. Overall, gameplay is serviceable, and while I'll always stand for Bobby Prince, this is one of his more repetitive scores, as there are really only about 6 tracks, although you will hear some fun remixes of Bond themes that'll make you smile. I definitely got to a point though where I was speedrunning this game to get through it, as 6 episodes of sameness really starts to wear on you. Aliens of Gold often drags on partly because it's either too easy or tedious. I played most of the game on the 2nd difficulty or skill, and didn't see but maybe an enemy or 2 per room. I bumped up the difficulty towards the end to make it feel climactic and dramatic, and it was nicely challenging without being hair-pulling. Especially on higher difficulties, enemies aren't staggered by your shots like they would be in Wolfenstein, and so they can hit you from quite a distance, sometimes whether you started firing first or not, and the closer you get, the more accurate they get as well, and can often burst fire you to death in under a second. And because you can't move and fire at the same time, you have to sit stock still at your preferred distance and try and outduel these guys. The boss fights also aren't particularly thrilling, and the action and the level design are fairly repetitive, so it's hard to recommend Aliens of Gold except to the retro shooter connoisseur. Fortunately, the sequel Planet Strike takes this foundation and makes it much more appealing, with only a few caveats. Right away, the game feels different. The menu music sets a serious tone, and there's even some Doom-adjacent music that pops up from time to time. Once you get into the game, the first message you're greeted with lets you know that the standard level objectives have changed. Instead of an elevator, you start off in a teleporter, which is what Blake uses to travel between each area of Planet Strike. Like Doom 2, this sequel also opts for a continuous campaign structure with no episode breaks. You play through 20 main levels and 2 more secret levels, and instead of having to find red keys, you're tasked with finding the red detonator in the level, and then using that to blow up a red cube that disables security on the teleporter so you can jump to the next area. It's mostly just a slight remix of the same concept as the first game, but I appreciate the attempt to make it feel and look fresh. Equally welcome.
What was that word?
What word?
Equally welcome additions are the new level textures and lighting effects. You'll get these glowing red walls, and there's even some low light level areas full of freaky ambiance. These disappear from the game a little too quickly though, and later levels are super short and easy, so I kind of wonder if crunch had any part to play in the brevity of these areas. Planet Strike's 20 mission campaign is also much shorter than Aliens of Gold's 54 main levels, too. Jam Productions balances this low level count out by making the enemies tougher and the layouts more complex. Not only that, but the mini-map is nerfed, which is a sentence I never thought I'd say. Unlike the full-scale map in Aliens of Gold, the map here only shows a zoomed-in mini-map of your general vicinity. You can further zoom in, and as long as you're at least at 4 times zoom, you'll be able to actually see the secret push walls marked in blue if you're close enough. You'll have a much harder time comprehending the level fully, though, because of this new zoomed-in approach, which is part of Jam Productions' intent here. And to top it all off, Planet Strike's navigation requires you to find secret passageways to circumvent blocked-off areas, and relies a lot more on one-way barriers and doors to make you find that Goldilocks path through the level. It also means you'll likely get stuck at least a couple times, as some of the ways forward are really arbitrary and unintuitive, and require a very specific photographic memory of some very samey-looking areas, which I did not find enjoyable at all. So, while I like that the levels are more interesting to look at, they can also be a real headache, much the same or even worse than Wolfenstein, which was the whole reason they added the minimap in Aliens of Gold in the first place. Fortunately, though, the action is a lot more fun this go around because of an awesome new weapon, and a much more varied and dangerous enemy roster. First and foremost, the action feels better because Jam added head bob animations as you walk that I always appreciate, as they make the game feel so much more alive. Doom had this feature too, and I guarantee that game wouldn't have felt nearly as good without that touch. You get all the same weapons as the first game, and they all work the same as before. The anti-plasmid cannon is the new addition here, and it is awesome. This thing fires out 2 devastating energy beams like a handheld Death Star, and the feedback and the soundtrack and the sound effect are so satisfying you'll just have to listen for yourself. The gun has its own special ammo supply too, and there's enough lying around that I could have leaned on a lot more than I did, as I tended to rely on the dual neutron disruptor, the fast-firing and powerful minigun that can take out turrets. I'm impressed though by this weapon's convincing level of detail for 1994. The anti-plasma cannon definitely makes the standard combat super fun just mowing through guys. You'll also see a lot of the same guys that you fought in the first game, but often repurposed or reworked. The two basic grunts that emulate the trooper and SS soldier archetypes from Wolfenstein look a lot more exotic this time around, and also making a return are the pod aliens, the clayface guy, insect-looking thing, robots, and bosses like the acid dragon and spider mutant are now regular enemies, and the alien protector, a straightforward gunner type until they randomly resurrect and start blasting you yet again. And now that I write that sentence, these are actually just a reskin of the other guys from the last game that got knocked down and could get right back up. But there are a couple new ones that are cool.
Nice one, brother. Fuck off.
There are also more enemies per area than Aliens of Gold, and Planet Strike also likes to cloak quite a few of the enemies, even these sort of mini-boss types that were bosses from the first game. Now, when these guys cloak in low-light areas, it can get pretty hairy and sometimes fairly cheap, but overall it's a welcome, intense experience to hear their cries from somewhere and have to scramble to locate them and return fire before they kill you. Speaking of those boss-type monsters, boss fights are also a lot more visually impressive this time around and fun to fight, even if they're still pretty straightforward. You'll tussle with this rather fearsome Spectre Demon, a Crawler Beast, and the transformed Dr. Goldfire. Outside of the Spectre Demon, whose blasts are really hard to dodge, the rest of the bosses are just bullet sponges, and the arenas are often open spaces with maybe a pillar or something in the middle to hide behind. They're far more fun to fight here, but they're not as good as Wolfenstein's, and the sheer scale alone pales in comparison to Doom's, of course. But they are overall a lot more enjoyable and a lot better looking and feeling, so I can appreciate that the game actually improved in this area. Now, there's one last thing I want to touch on before we close the book on Planet Strike. If you'll notice, I haven't mentioned food machines or biotechs in this particular game. It's weird how few levels make use of them, and how these concepts weren't really iterated on at all here. I can count on one hand how often I use the food machines versus how I used every last food token in Aliens of Gold, and many levels just simply don't feature the biotechs at all. Considering this is one of Blake Stone's primary innovations, it's a little disappointing to sidestep them entirely here. But alas, I guess we'll have to get our NPC fix in Strife and Deus Ex some sunny day, coming to a channel near you. And there you have it, Blake Stone Aliens of Gold and Blake Stone Planet Strike. Having played them in 2022 for the first time, and having played the majority of 90s classic shooters these past 2 COVID years, I have to say that while Blake Stone has its pulpy sci-fi charms, from its creative monster designs to its cool minimap design and decent weapons, its structure is oftentimes walking in step too often with Wolfenstein's pre-established tropes, and even then it strips back what quality of life improvements it had over Wolfenstein in the Planet Strike sequel. So should you play these games? Well, to be honest, after playing Wolfenstein, Doom, Quake, Duke Nukem, Blood, Shadow Warrior, and more, the Blake Stone games are the most unremarkable of the bunch. They have neither the quirky, high-reward, high-risk design choices of a game of that era, like Kingsfield or Rise of the Triad or Hexen or whatever, and so it doesn't really stand out from the pack, either against its contemporaries or against the test of time. But to answer my initial question, should they be remembered? Well, yes, in the same way that, when you're a kid and you find an arrowhead in your backyard, it doesn't make the first or the last arrowhead any less cool that you found it just because you may have found 20 of them in your backyard. It's an arrowhead, so it's pretty cool. The playable museum factor of any old boomer shooter carries nostalgic or historic import with it, especially Blake Stone, as it's the only true Wolfenstein clone I feel that's actually playable or interesting enough to be playable, unless you count Operation Body Count or Corridor 7 or Nightmare.
No, I don't think I will.
Or Noah's Ark 3D, Noah's Ark 2x2D. I'm sorry. To the cynical shooter fan who really is searching for indisputable classics, this ain't it. But for Wolfenstein fans who want more of that style of gameplay or the curious connoisseur of 90s goodness, I advise you to go ham on Dr. Goldfire and play these games. They'll be a pleasant enough time sink from the past. But Blake Stone hates chatter, so that's enough chatter from me. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day. Worst case scenario, even if it's aggressively mediocre, at least it'll make you think of me.